Hello, good evening to everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me. This is a spur of the moment discussion. I am generally in contact with Joachim Gerlach. I tend to call him the Spike King because he is one of those people who just don't stop researching. And his research is going to be very, very important in the near future. And this is something that I don't think the scientific community is fully aware of, the implications of spike protein on health. And so, what we're going to be doing today is talking about a paper that he and a number of other scientists, spike mediated compound immune deficiency cascade in COVID and long COVID. And we'll be discussing the science around this. And I'm here to ask questions. You can put your questions in the chat as well. But without further ado, why don't we get to meet Joachim? Joachim, can you just do a quick introduction for everyone?
Yes, of course. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this format. My name is Joachim Gerlach. I'm head of research and development in several companies, and I'm also the co-founder and coordinator of the RAPID project, which is a research alliance for post-infectious diseases. And I'm working with a large group of experts and scientists globally, trying to tackle this problem and try to understand the disease on one hand, find solutions in diagnostics and therapeutics to tackle and to mitigate the fallout of this after the pandemic, as we might say.
Straight away, Joachim, one of the points that a lot of people say, I'll look out for it in the comments, is that all of this is behind us now. This is no longer relevant. What do you say to people who put that across?
Yeah, that is a multi-layered topic. To put it very simply, is that the documented levels of infection in the general population, metadata from the US, Germany, and other countries suggests otherwise. So the Omicron and SARS-CoV-2 is still very strongly present. And until now, if you do a calculation over the past 6 years and 2 months or 3 months now, the average amount of infections that each individual statistically has had to endure is 5.4, I think, times. So some people were more often infected, others not so often. And so the only question that now can be asked, if the virus is still present, is it any different than it was in 2020, 2021, etc.? Has it lost its damage potential, or is it still there? So these are the real questions, and unfortunately, that's very narrative laden. you know yourself. So we have the I would say justified criticism on the measures that were taken in the first 2 years of the pandemic in order to maybe put up enough pressure so that people would take the vaccine, and so there was quite some abuse in that. But I wish we could really call it off and say, the pandemic is over, you don't have to worry anymore about this. So we do see worrisome data. We are actually the only group in the world that is doing a survey, for example. So I started that in December 2025. We have a blood prick quick test that you can detect spike protein circulating in blood samples very quickly. It's like a diabetes kind of test, so you can see within minutes if somebody has a certain threshold of spike protein circulating, and the positivity rates are much higher than ever before. So it's not only the acute infection of the virus itself, it is also the perpetuating production of spike protein from the vaccine and or the virus. And it's not like you produce some spike and it circulates. It's not like maybe a toxin or something that would then be degraded or something. What it does is the spike that circulates is very, very sticky. So it will then bind to receptors or your endothelial cells and organs and even in the brain, and it will then disappear. And then, so normally you shouldn't find continuously high spike levels in a person, it is an indication that you have an ongoing production because it disappears so quickly into the tissue and it's been taken up there. So that leads us now to the conclusion that you have a constant saturation of tissues from that spike protein. And now I'm looking at which are the worst cells that you don't want to have exposed to spike. And that leads us to what we're talking about today. You have certain certain cells
think
that don't want that.
one of the points that I think is very challenging for the scientific community is this focus on spike protein. It would be a lot easier if you said, a nucleocapsid protein or, the envelope protein. The reason why the spike protein creates such irritation is because it doesn't just represent the virus, but it also represents the intervention. And this is what I think is one of the primary reasons why the scientific community has some degree of cognitive dissonance about focusing on what are the implications of ongoing spike presence in the body. And this is a huge issue. And as you said, that you guys are now able to quantify it. But one of the interesting points that I've observed is not everybody who has spike protein has symptoms. What did you find when you guys did your research on, say, asymptomatic people?
Yeah, so we in the survey we have a little booklet where you the survey is being done by doctors because we don't yet have a compliance so that you can use it at home. It still needs a medical somebody with a medical background, like a therapist or a doctor, to do this. And so we categorized the cohorts into 3 different cohorts: one asymptomatic, one with mild symptoms, and one with moderate to severe symptoms, which, like in the 3rd cohort, you would call them long COVID patients that are already at the doctors and in the clinics seeking help for very typical and also with other biomarkers diagnosed long COVID. And so the distribution of positivity rates was quite astonishing. So the data on the patients is the most solid data we have, because we have also the data from the MMD lab in Germany, and so they do like 40 to 50 blood samples per day. And what we could observe there is that the patients have a very high level of positivity rate. That means over 90 to 95% positive rate for circulating spike. The spike is being measured free in the serum, in exosomes and in the PBMCs, in the immune cells. And so that is a very clear language. With our survey, with the blood prick test, we could do now up to, we have crossed 400 samples from the sample size so far. And we're very proud of that because nobody has ever done that. And there you can see that the asymptomatic were only on 75 to 80% positive rate. The mild symptomatic were on 85, and the symptomatic group was exactly congruent with the results from MMD. So also the test seems to be pretty accurate. Yeah. Philip, you're mute.
Sorry, did you just say that the asymptomatic cohort was 75% positive?
Yeah, even more sometimes, and it's constantly rising. Yeah, so for example, we don't have data from last year or a long term before, because there was no test like we have now, and so we have to only rely on the data from MMD, from that lab in Germany. And so Bridget is trying to get some statistics out, but they're so overworked, it's going to take us more time to get that statistics. But from her rough estimate, it was spike positivity rate in patients was in 2024 around, let's say, maximum 40%. In the course of 2025, that was already on 75%. And in the last quarter, 2025, it went up again like a hockey stick to over 90%. So we can see that the amount of spike that is present in the patients is increasing in the absence of nucleocapsid, that means you cannot find, or very rarely, live virins. And and it's getting very complicated. So we also did with Carlo Brogna's lab in Milan, with the ISB under Simone Cristoni, we did also like 150 samples to identify to get the ratio vaccine spike versus virus spike. That was also interesting. Yeah? So it seems like the more than 80 or more, almost 90% of the spike circulating is from the virus. And so we were wondering, Bridget, I was for like more than a year and a half, I was trying very hard to find out how can we find so much spike from the virus without viral presence. But maybe we can do that in another emission, in another stream, to show how SARS-CoV-2, when it enters into the cells, can build certain vesicles like membrane bunkers to store its RNA in there and synthesize spike from that without viral presence.
Yeah, one of the interesting papers I'd come across recently was the fact that the virus, and this would make sense, that the virus can use CD147 to enter cells, and specific immune cells would be affected. But not only does it enter the cell, but it upregulates the CD147, so opening more doors to allow virus in. And so we are seeing, I think one of the problems is that everybody has been focused on severe COVID in the context of the risk to the population. I am much more concerned now about the ongoing circulation and the impact it is having generally on health. And this leads us right in to where you guys have been working with regards to this paper. What was it that made you decide that you and this team, this is a global team. I know quite a number of the people. So it's Germany, Pakistan, USA, Italy. So there's quite a broad group of people who were involved in this paper. What was the main driver for it?
For us, it's always difficult to prioritize. First of all, we are working still, like after 6 years, we're still working 7 days a week in 2 shifts, many of us. That means we hardly have time to publish. But then I was kind of, in January, I was kind of getting a little bit upset about appropriation by other scientists of our knowledge. And I said, okay, we have accumulated in just the database that I accumulated is now reaching more than 30,000 publications and papers and lab results, etc. So we have to somehow now harvest this knowledge and go and publish on each sector. Now, so with the Research Alliance that most of these co-authors are belonging to, we have 6 centers. And in the 6 centers, you have viral antigen presentation, acute infection, vaccination, and also opportunistic infections that are resulting from this. In the second center, you have I call them systemic objectives like metabolic disorders, like the epigenetic dysregulation, cancer, etc., and mitochondria, etc. So everything that's systemic. And below these 2, we call them better horizontals, you have 4 verticals. You have cardiovascular, neurological disorders, you have gastrointestinal, and you have immune dysregulation or immune deficiency. So now at the moment we are trying to publish one landmark publication in each center, so that we bring the knowledge as good as possible to where we are now, even including some hypotheses, because this publication is actually a research proposal inviting other scientists to prove or disprove the hypotheses that were published now in this.
So this is, as I said, this is an ongoing research project. And one of the problems that we seem to have is that not enough people in the scientific community are taking this probably as seriously as they should. There's a lot of focus somewhat on long COVID, but I am very concerned about the other unusual presentations that we are seeing that appear to be connected with COVID exposure, and the population broadly has absolutely no idea that there could be a connection. Actually, I'd go further. I'm not sure even if the medical fraternity recognizes just how serious this can be. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's say the clinics and doctors that are treating long COVID and post-vac patients, they are very well aware, for example, about what we're talking today here, the immunodeficiency, immune dysregulation, including even autoimmune. But let's say now the loss of immunocompetence is so obvious that they are screaming from the rooftops, especially in Germany, really very, very qualified, experienced, and specialized doctors and clinics that work on long COVID and post-vac. They say Lyme, Candida, all kind of retrovirus activation, shingles, EBV, you just name it, goes through the roof. Then you have opportunistic infections with bacteria, mycoplasma, staphylococcus, streptococcus, etc., etc. You saw some cases in Britain right now with meningitis, etc. So all that goes through the roof in waves over the whole population, and especially in the long COVID patients. They are just further down the road than the normal population. Yeah, we put in that publication, we put some examples of what you can observe. Yeah, and so what this paper tries to do, this publication, is to span the arc from the receptor on the stem cell of an immune cell and the molecular biological mechanisms all the way to the metadata in the population that is now already observable. And in order to find out, you have to go into many, many different databases in the US, in Britain, and in Europe and Germany, in order to find data on different pathogens, on their prevalence, and if is there an increase. So whatever I do, I usually go, I say, what is the average before 2020 until 2019, and then look what has changed since 2020, and is there progression? For example, in Britain, you had mycoplasma infection, hospital, how you call that? That people went to hospital for that, hospital events that went skyrocketing in 2024 and 2025, 500% increase. So that there I have a question mark. I say, how is that possible if there's not a loss of immunocompetence in these patients that show up there? And same as now for this Candida. Candida is very well known. Actually, what I did, I wrote another Substack yesterday in which I compared, let's say, the end result to what is happening with HIV or AIDS. It's not the same. The mechanisms are different. Yeah. But the result is very similar.
Just pause before you move on. I think it's important for people to understand with the Candida, it's a fungal infection, and it usually doesn't cause too much serious disease unless people are somewhat immune compromised. And that's the fungal infection where you'll see little white spots in the mouth and so on. And so it's easy to treat. But as Joachim was pointing out, what you're seeing here from 2020 onwards is this rapid rise in the number of cases. This is looking at CDC surveillance. So now you can argue that there may be another reason, but because we know that there is a pretty close association with immune deficiency, I can understand why you have that link, especially with Candida and some other things. So I think it's an important point for people to understand. But yes, keep going. What were you saying?
Yeah, look, it's so we can speak more about the metadata that is visible in Robert Koch Institute Germany, in the NHS in Britain, in the HHS and NIH data and CDC data in the US, looking at all the ICD codes, looking at all the prescription rates, looking at all the amount of turnover for antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, etc., etc. So the data, nobody has done that before, so we have collected as good as possible the data. And it actually is that only one part of what I call the shadow population problem. Yes, we have now maybe in the US, I know the US numbers is maybe around 20 million diagnosed long COVID cases. But the amount of people suffering from some condition that is not classified under the long COVID is probably twice as high. And the problem is that, for example, the loss of immunocompetence has, through constant exposure to SARS-CoV-2 and the spike protein and the vaccination, has led now to a decline in the overall immunocompetence of the population, where it starts to reach a threshold that is critical. Actually, what really got me to publish this paper with my colleagues was the exponential rise of spike protein presence in these samples. Must come from somewhere. Yeah, because our immune systems cannot control not only other pathogens, but including also SARS-CoV-2 infections, and also our, let's say, the antibody evasiveness that you have talked to with Gerd van den Bossche before is also kicking in right now strongly. And so that means we are seeing many multi-layered mechanisms that are leading to a vulnerable population that is now more susceptible to any kind of reactivation or opportunistic infections than it was before, and we're reaching a certain threshold.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that people are not aware of, and I know this again from looking at metadata in the UK. So I've been looking at the ICD codes and the transitions, and there is no doubt that the characteristics of illness has changed. And with regards to what you have said with regards to immune competence, one very unusual pattern is a fall off in terms of sepsis diagnosis. So sepsis is usually when people have usually bacterial infections and are very unwell with it. The only explanation I can find, because it's not that people are no longer having infections, it suggests that they are no longer presenting with typical symptoms. And this is very similar to what we would see with immunocompromised people who are, say, on chemotherapy. They don't present normally with sepsis either. So we are seeing very unusual trends and patterns which fit with what you're saying. But I guess one of the questions that I've been asking is this immune deficiency, or is it primarily the immune system that has become chronically dysregulated and is just focusing on the wrong targets? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that is more like the question of branding. How do you want to brand that? So, of course, there is severe dysregulation. That is another topic in by itself. So whenever SARS-CoV-2 virus and or spike protein meets our organism, there is a whole array of mechanisms that are triggered off. And a lot of those are immune dysregulation, if you want to call that, inflammation, cytokine production. Some of it is normal defense. And actually, the spike protein is actually really the king in how can you say, co-opting our immune or our defense responses. Now, for example, the spike protein, if that is exposed to neutrophils and they spit out neutrophil elastase, that triggers a whole new cascade of damage potential, leading into mainly into the microclots and into other kind of severe problems. So yes, there is an immune dysregulation without doubt, and it goes hand in hand with what I would really call now, and we have to call the child by its name, immunodeficiency, loss of immunocompetence, of defenses against any kind of pathogenic class, be it viral, retroviral activation, be it fungal, or be it bacterial. And we have published that already a long time ago, 3.5 years ago. That was the first publication, and it was not taken serious because there were some indications, but it was still, remember, the discussion about the immune depth because of the lockdowns. Because of the lockdowns, now all of a sudden we could see a rise in this and that, and so nobody wanted to see this. Nobody wanted to take it serious. But now we have much better data because immune depth in 2025, 2026 is not an argument anymore. Forget it. That's too long ago. So what we really see is a strong uptake in that. And there's another thing. If you listen to all the colleagues now that are facing these very aggressive cancers, Yeah, they are all now trying their best, really heroic fight in trying to beat these cancers. But half the rent is your immune system. If your immune system is severely compromised, then also your immune check on cancer cells is compromised. Yeah, and so they can.
Actually, I'll
Yeah.
pause you on there, an important point, because I recently did a presentation to a Malaysian group talking about, again, this CD147 and the fact that in cancer cells that have upregulated CD147, if they then get exposed to the virus spike protein and you have further upregulation, these then end up being quite aggressive cancers. And I think that there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what is happening with cancer. A lot of people keep on thinking that it's cancer that's we call it turbo cancer, but I think that the turbo cancer causes a problem. I would just say that we are seeing cancer that is presenting at a very late stage, not typical of what we would expect going through all the stages. The best example that we have, or that we have in terms of cancer, is melanoma. It's almost as if the normal routine cancers are behaving like melanoma, where it is spreading very quickly, metastasizing quickly, and therefore it means by the time people turn up, they have advanced disease. This is the kind of discussion that we need, but definitely there has been a change in the presentation of cancer as well, and there doesn't seem to be enough acknowledgement of this because the implications are so serious.
The question is what you can do about it. So we are working overtime right now in order to with many clinics, they are having different approaches on how to restore the immune functionality, the immune competence. But that's not so easy, because you have been since day one saying, okay, we have to have this very strong autoimmune component in long COVID, or up in the post-viral phase, let's put it that way. And so you cannot just help to ramp up the immune system indiscriminately without running the danger of worsening autoimmune reactions and autoantibody levels in the patients. So this is a very, very tricky business, and I'm so happy that now very, very knowledgeable clinics and doctors and therapists are working on that with different products, different approaches. So let's see how that works out. So there is a lot of ongoing evaluation. I can say that maybe in a few months we can have a look at it. But first of all, we have to caution. Again, now you want to caution people not to get infected with COVID. So that then you are again in that narrative corner. He wants to make panic, and I don't want to put these coffee filters on my nose, etc. So look, we have to be realistic. No panic, not be scared, but to be cautious. Because if we know something can damage, to be scared of something that can screw you up is a healthy reaction. It's not stupid. It's stupid not to be scared. So be cautious, and if you think you have a flu, maybe check if you have COVID, because it needs to be treated differently than a flu. It's not a flu. It is a really bad virus, and it has remained so. I mean, we published, you can go on ResearchGate, my name, put it there, ResearchGate, and you will find a paper that I published for people are in this narrative discussion, what is worse, the spike from the virus or the spike from the vaccine? So what we did, we took the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and we compared it to all other coronaviruses that were out there before or still out there. And we looked what makes SARS-CoV-2 spike so special. What are the features of that spike protein that have that high damage potential? And they're around 10 that are really, let's say, worth mentioning in the spike protein. And any of them, each one of them is of high concern. And so then we compared wild type spike, Wuhan, Delta, Alpha, Delta, etc. And then looked at the vaccine spike itself. And then we looked at Omicron, the latest variants. And to our surprise, you don't find many structural differences between these two spike proteins. And don't kill me, I'm only the messenger. I'm just telling you what is scientifically there. There is something in the wild type spike that is also in the vaccine spike that nobody has yet been able to pinpoint. And that is the question, why do we have this severe disease expression after exposure?
Yeah.
So we have,
these are some very, very critical points. And as I said, what has happened is that everybody is trying to move beyond COVID and the pandemic, but it doesn't mean that the pandemic has moved beyond you. I just wanted to share this section here of the paper. You added in this falsification test of the classical immune death hypothesis, and this was added in afterwards. What made you do this, and what really is it talking about?
Now, yeah, because we have this discussion since many years, and for me, it's very frustrating if I want to point out that there is some danger potential and something ongoing, and you brushed off all the time with, it's immune depth, it's immune depth. So you can look at the Swedish data, for example. Sweden didn't have any significant lockdowns. And so the immune depth hypothesis, then Sweden should have different numbers, but Sweden also has a lot of problems with opportunistic and strongly rising bacterial and viral infections in their databases. They don't have that good databases, but it's also there, the signal. So that was just like preemptively addressing a possible critique point of people that read the paper, so that they this is a research proposal. Yeah? So I'm also open. Look, in our field, we can have a good discussion. We can have also different opinions. I hope so, that we have different opinions, because only like that we can work out somewhere. You have to come up with your arguments, and you have to pronounce them and formulate them. So the worst thing that can happen is that we agree on everything. We don't even agree on everything within our collaborative. But that there is a problem now is obvious, and maybe in this paper, what we did and what especially came out of my archives are two things. First of all, CD147. Most people know 2 or 3 receptors that the spike protein and or the virus can use to enter into the cell, but there are more than 20 already documented ad nauseum. And so what we did now, finally, what was long overdue, is to have a receptor landscape over all the immune cells, which receptors are on which immune cell, and we start from the hematopoietic stem cell in the bone marrow, and then we go down the whole tree of all immune cells in your body. And then you have a classification in color and amount of stars that will show you the susceptibility to spike protein over different receptor types and different immune cell types, starting from the bone marrow stem cells. That is a systematic work that nobody has ever done. Yeah.
And so this is the image that we've got here. And the LTHSC, these are the hematopoietic stem cells. And
Yes,
what it
sir.
seems to be saying is ACE2 is highest there. And as we go down, so say, for instance, I had mentioned CD147, very high on monocytes and macrophages, as well as CD4 and TH17 cells as well. DC sign is another entry point. These are on dendritic cells. We can see DPP4. Now, this is usually associated with MERS infection. Are we saying that this spike protein can use DPP4 as well to enter cells?
Absolutely. And remember in 2020, when we met, and by the end of 2020, I had that on the drug target pathway list since already beginning of 2020, and everybody was making fun of us. That's a MERS receptor. That's not for SARS-CoV-2. Huh? Okay. So I'm very happy that it's strongly confirmed now as a receptor for, especially for the later Omicron variants. Look, when you see this receptor mapping, you have to understand that that's another paper we published in January, where we elaborated on 2 things. Actually, what you have been discussing with Gerd van den Bossche is the antibody evasiveness of SARS-CoV-2 and especially its spike protein, and the receptor prevalence that let's say that it can bind, each variant can bind to different receptors, and that goes hand in hand, because the mutations that try to evade the antibodies will also enable it now to dock to bind to other receptors. That goes hand in hand. That's really a very interesting paper, if you want to read that. And so it shows you the antibody evasiveness and the cell receptor tropism goes hand in hand, and that is what we see right now. And the worrisome part is that Omicron has started off very harmless and very mild, and now it's actually evolving into a little bastard. And it's highly antibody evasive. That means that our B cells and the IgG antibodies cannot stop it anymore. We have a complete immune dysregulation in that sense, that it's also explained in that paper, especially in the vaccinated, because remember, you had these discussions with Gerd and also with Shankara about the IgG4 class switch in the antibodies, which are now giving you a very clear picture that your antibodies have turned tolerant to an allergen that is constantly present. And if you remember Shankara, how he treated from 2020 to Omicron came mainly, was, of course, he was treating a hypersensitivity overreaction in these patients. So what we can say, if you now take the spike protein from the variants before Omicron and you inject that into people, you're going to cause, in a lot of these individuals, you're going to cause the same reaction like you had when you had the hot SARS-CoV-2 virus. And that might be why you see the vaccinated with these high IgG4 levels, because they had the pleasure of getting the old wild type spike that would still have this hypersensitivity trigger in it. We don't know yet exactly where it is. It's probably in the RBD, but nobody has even bothered to research that any further. So all these compounds.
Yeah, I'll just say on that point, one of the interesting things is that it wasn't the IgG4, which is the tolerant antibody. It seems as though it was primarily zoned in on the mRNA. So even when they looked at the vector-based adenovirus vaccines, they didn't really do that much IgG4. It was really the mRNA. And I think that maybe because they stabilized it with proline. So they added these proline residues, and suddenly I think that the immune system struggled to digest it. But then what we're left with now is that all of these people are now, when they are exposed to the virus, are no longer trying to get rid of it. Could that be part of the reason why we're seeing so much of an increase from your studies in the presence of spike protein, that the system is no longer able to get rid of this spike? Any thoughts on the IgG4 on that?
Absolutely, and we do see that the vaccinated are worse off than the unvaccinated. I didn't mention that before. I didn't want to bring too many topics in the same mix. So when we look at our survey that we do with the spike prick test here, in the cohort, in the asymptomatic cohort, we had a very low percentage of vaccinated, only very low. I think it was 20-something%. And in the symptomatic cohorts, it was 60% or more that were vaccinated. So a much higher percentage of vaccinated are more symptomatic. So they are sicker, to put it that way. So how is the composition of being so sick? Let's say a loss in immune competence is for sure part of it. But we are building a database right now, and in which we had to include, guess how many different pathways we had to include just in the damage description and the damage potential of SARS-CoV-2 and its spike protein. We're getting now close to 600. And that is not including epigenetics, that these are thousands. So 600, close to 600 clear dysregulations that are in a cascade and branching off like a river delta. So it's very hard to say what is now in this particular patient happening. In 6 months from now, hopefully we can provide you a database that you can log in and you can give a picture of your patient, the symptomatics, symptoms, biomarkers, etc., etc. And based on our database, AI can tell you more or less which direction to further investigate in that patient. That's what we're working on right now. But it's a lot of data, and it's hundreds of thousands of papers that need to be managed and cross-tagged and to be built up. But in the case of what you're saying here now, the vaccinated have a stronger immune dysregulation, and they even have a lower immune competence than the unvaccinated. Yes, this can be said. But there's more mechanisms to this whole problem. Yeah. So the immune loss of
I
immune
brought this
competence.
up here so that you could hammer in on this in the paper. These 8 mechanisms of immunodeficiency, where you're saying the bone marrow invasion. This one is extremely important because essentially this is where all of our cells, replicating cells, are housed mostly for the body, and so did you put this as mechanism 1 because it was the most common or the most serious?
I'm also trying to when I work now from the methodology, I try to start from the beginning, and so as this is the beginning of the development of immune cells, and if that is hit, then you are hitting the source, and that's always bad in any kind of mechanism you're looking at. Now that's why I put this there, and because it is a systemic problem, so to speak, for all immune cells. And it is happening. And maybe a word of caution. I see a lot of people that are trying to copy what we are doing with our clinics and with our interventions. You have 2 states of damage in the stem cells, not only from the immune cells, but for all other stem cells. This counts for all body cells, the bone marrow problem. And so you have senescence. Now, many start to understand now that spike exposure or exposure to the virus causes senescence in the cell that is affected, and it causes senescence also indirectly in the cells that are around it. And so many people move in right now with high dosage senolytics, fisetin, etc. And I can only caution because of this problem, because you have 2 type of senescent cells. The ones that you would call VIS, virus-induced senescence, they contain antigen, and you have some that are so-called bystander senescent, which is reversible. And as you have only a limited amount and quantity of stem cells, you cannot run in now like a berserker and throw senolytics on it and kill them all and have a huge collateral damage. So we are working very hard with experts and in different clinical settings to see if we can reverse the senescence in these vulnerable, I call them crown jewel cells that we only have a limited amount of before you start to come in with other interventions that kick out the spike protein or even eliminate cells that are affected.
It's very important. I'm looking through the mechanisms here. I'll show you another one for the audience. You have here mechanism 3, persistent spike protein in the PBMCs. These are essentially the monocytes. For me, from our research, this one here is the beast in the picture. And everything we seem to be saying was that these here are the primary drivers of many of the patterns that we see. What are your thoughts as to, when you look at all of these mechanisms, what stands out to you as the most significant one that is impacting?
They're all, I don't even classify them anymore as higher or lower danger potential, because first of all, this is only known from Bruce Patterson's work to start with. And remember the discussions we had, is it phagocytosis mechanism or are they directly infected and so on? It's all academic, nice to discuss that. But I did calculations now, because when we find in the Magdeburg and Bridget lab, for example, we find 180 picogram of spike protein per 2.5 million cells. So you can do the math on that. And then nobody has ever really measured the distribution, because the PBMCs are a lot of cells. Yeah, you have not only the monocytes, and it's practically a large part of our innate immune cells are part of the PBMCs and even the adaptive immune cells. So they can all be, as you have seen on the receptor landscape, they can all be hit. Especially the dendritic cells also are hit, and they're, let's say, they're in the core between our immune reaction. They are kind of like presenting antigens to our real immune army. And you saw DC sign. Remember Charles Rixey, the expert on biowarfare? He was like, DC sign was high on the list. Yeah, so if I have a antigen that use DC sign as a receptor, I can screw up the dendritic cells, which is like in the middle of your immune system. Like that's a big damage. And so, yes, it's a cluster bombing, starting from the stem cell to all the way to any kind of immune cell, not only them. We don't know the distribution yet, but it can be across the board with 188 picogram, which is a moderate to high level, which is in many, many samples. You can practically affect more than 20, 30, 40% of all your immune cells and dysregulate them and make them inefficient. And maybe they're still there, but they don't work anymore. If you look at the T cells, NK cells, TCD4, CD8, etc., it's like if you ask in general, you're the minister of war, and you call your general, hey general, how many armored vehicles do you have in your division? He would go like, 2,000, and you go like, yeah, but your guys start out and see how many work. And so that's the problem. They even sometimes in the count, they look that they are there, but they're dysfunctional. They don't work anymore, especially the phagocytes, of course. Yeah. So that's one problem. But if you,
I was going to say, I'm just going through some of the points in the paper because I think it's important for the audience to see some of these really critical points. And the other one that you targeted was the intracellular damage, where you're looking at mitochondria, the viroporin, ATP depletion, all of these things that you're putting in here. Are these all you are proposing related to the presence of spike protein in cells, and are some cells more affected than others?
Yes, this is again, it's a mixed picture. So what you see is there's two different kind of main damage here. Let's put it that way. Where you have viral antigen presence in an immune cell or any other cell, what you find is, for example, direct mitochondrial damage. You find even viral or spike RNA within the mitochondria. That's already proven now. So if Bridget is a mitochondrial expert. She's running the Spike lab, but actually she comes from mitochondria science, and she's measuring the PBMCs, and she can see a loss of mitochondrial function of over 70 or more percent across the board in all PBMCs. So of course they can't work properly. And the damage, again, can even start not only with the immune cells, but with all cells from the stem and progenitor cells. And it can be a direct viral presence in the cell or on the membrane, or it can be a bystander epigenetic reprogramming of the cell happening through SASP inflammatory factors. And that is translated into the mature cells. That was also now clearly measured and published. Now you start with the stem cells and you dysregulate them completely, and then they start to proliferate and move into the organism, not only into the immune system, but into other organ systems, and carry the epigenetic dysregulation into maturity. That's also happening.
There's something that keeps coming up, and somebody has just put it in the chat, so I think I'll show you this. When they use VADES, what goes through your mind? Is that too far a confabulation to say that it is similar to acquired immune deficiency syndrome? And the V at the front tends to suggest that it's more vaccine induced. Is that fair? Is that scientific? Any thoughts?
Now, look, it's a hot topic, but okay, from a scientific point of view, an exposure to the mRNA vaccines and high levels of spike protein for sure has led to severe immune dysregulations and a loss of immunocompetence, as we can see now in many patients that are measured, as well in the adaptive and in the innate immune system, both of it. If it is worse than just a COVID infection, that's open for discussion. But I would say that as most of the population has received several mRNA injections and have been exposed to this, let's say, antigen, or like a, how can you say that, like a conversion into a antigen production in your own body. And most people have also been infected on top of that. It's kind of difficult now to pull this apart and say, is the fault of what? The only thing I can for sure say is that if you have already health problems resulting from the vaccine or long COVID, doesn't really matter, any reinfection is going to be very bad. Yeah, it falls on fertile ground. So that people are concentrated, especially on our side of the equation here, everybody is rightfully concerned about the vaccine. But the vaccine is now pretty much a dead horse. Who's getting vaccinated now with COVID vaccine? That's a very small percentage compared to 2021. So, but we do see that the virus is still ongoing and in at very high levels. And so if you look at it, if I would have to distinguish what kind of damage can do the vaccine, what kind of damage can do the virus, actually they both, if together, it's a binary system that gives you more damage. Yeah? And if you go back to so AIDS, yes, exists. I wouldn't call it that. It is because AIDS is different. You have a HIV that's a retrovirus that is embedding itself into our immune cells as a retrovirus. That is a little bit different mechanism as what the spike protein is doing. The result is the same. We can put my Substack into this stream here on the bottom. It explains that you have 8 different fields of immunodeficiency that are addressed by spike protein from the virus and the vaccine that are having this, in the end, the result in the same, like you see in AIDS cases, but it's a different mechanism. So I would not compare that directly, because then you can be taken apart scientifically. The result is similar, and hopefully we can reverse it. Whereas in AIDS, you can't, because it is embedded. And we're not sure yet to which degree I can reverse prescribe it to ourselves. There are some findings, yes, but we have to see how bad is it and how prevalent.
I'll just quickly share. I just typed in and got your Substack here. This is you looking at all of a lot of these discussions here. So it's just Joachim Gerlach 1 at substack.com. And so if you want to take a look at some of his work and research there, that's pretty easy to do. But when as we come now, Joachim, and we start to think about where we are now, because one of the things that seems to be clear, and the fact that you have and work with Charles Rixey, who was part of that Diffuse project looking at the origins of the virus, do you think that at this point we should still be too focused on who is at fault, or are we still in the midst of trying to figure out how to mitigate what is in front of us, no matter where the source came from? What are your thoughts at this point?
Look, if you look at the workload that we have, you as a doctor during the week treating patients, at night doing research and live streams and everything, and other doctors training over on the weekend, you have to be careful with your let's say a capacity of resources. So from my side, there are a lot of people that are working now on the political fallout, that are working on the jurisdiction side, and on, let's say, on the lawsuits that are ongoing, etc., finding the people responsible, which needs to be done. But you can't do everything. You can't be world class in COVID and spike science and be an activist and be present in all lawsuits and be present on social media. And so my side and some of my colleagues, we are mainly working, learning every day about this disease, because we still are not not there. We might be at the end of the beginning, a little bit further by now in understanding it, or hoping to understand. So this is going to keep us busy for many more years, just from understanding it, let alone all the therapeutics that need to be done and the diagnostics.
So
And yes,
as we come to the close here, Joachim, I want you to focus on the thing that really most people I have found have been very concerned about, and that's the research you're doing with regards to the spike testing. And just a summary again as to what you have found, what your vision is for where this needs to go, and realistically, what are the how important is this work that nobody else seems to be doing to try and understand about spike exposure in the population?
Yeah, the spike protein for sure is one of the most toxic parts of that whole construct. And I mean, you can't just talk exclusively only about spike. The envelope, nuclear caps, and other proteins, open reading frames, and others are also capable of doing a lot of damage. But if you see an exponential rise in spike presence in people, for example, which we didn't expect, I was really surprised myself. And then gets the discussion: yeah, is it from the virus? Is it from the vaccine? I think we should take that serious, and any kind of exposure, be it through the injection or infusion, is probably to be taken very cautiously and to be treated, if possible, with something at least. And so I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to create any panic, but we know that Omicron, so the secondary damages after the spike exposure, epigenetic dysregulation, inflammation, neurological disease expressions, cardiovascular, especially microthrombi. The microthrombi have not decreased in the population cohorts at all during Omicron. Nothing. And it doesn't really matter if somebody is vaccinated or not. The amount and the size of microclots measured in several hundred samples that we could get the data from finally between 2023 and the end of 2025 shows a very clear picture that in the patients, over 98% of the measured patients in Alabama in the lab had elevated in size and quantity microclots that classified 2.5 out of 4, which is severe. So there are a lot of things that we observe and see the data, and nobody's measuring it because there are no labs, there are not the right diagnostics tools. That's why I'm developing now some diagnostic tools that are at least for the most important parameters, so that doctors and even private individuals can say, look, I want to check if I have something, because you see the population gets sicker and sicker. It's not getting better.
And so when just practically, because people ask this all the time, is that this is the link. You'll have to pause it. This is in Germany though, so this is not necessarily available to everybody just yet. Is it? Where are you with regards to being able to get this to people if they are just curious, even to understand what their exposure is, even if they are asymptomatic?
Yeah, I mean the MMD lab is serving to clinics and doctors and therapists that can draw blood and put them in vials. So when you go to the website, you have a form that you can require, and then they will contact you, and then you arrange the transport with the MMD lab. I know that they take blood from Cyprus, they take blood from other countries, Austria, Switzerland, and so on. I think they also do UK. I'm not sure. So I don't know exactly in which country I'm not so deeply into operations, but just send a request and do this. And the finger lateral flow blood prick test is available all over the European Union. It's certified, CE certified for the use for doctors. And spike-test.com. And it can be ordered by doctors and therapists. I'm not sure about UK. I can find out, but I can't tell you out of my head how far we are there.
Yeah, this is very important, and I think that this is the next frontier, because I think that there was a hope that a lot of the symptoms and the issues would have passed by now. But every indication from what I'm seeing clinically, from what I'm looking at with the ICD codes about hospital admissions, patterns of illness, we are seeing a year-on-year rise with people getting sicker and sicker. And
Yeah.
my only assumption at the moment is that this is very likely to be connected to exposure and retention of spike protein, especially in the immune system. So I think that there is a lot of work that needs to be done to try and better understand this. And we are very appreciative that there are scientists like yourself who keep on pushing. This is now 6 years of work, Joachim, day and night, 7 days a week for most of the time. So you've really been burning the candle for a long time. So as we close out, Joachim, what are your final thoughts from your paper, from your work, that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, the first call would be to really it can't hurt to lead a healthy life, get out into the fresh air, move, eat good, take good supplements, have your body bolstered up, your whole system, because look, we are seeing maybe 5% or 8 or 10% of the population now being sick and hard to treat. They're difficult to treat. If you talk to Cyprus, to Beate, and even in the US and other clinics, and to Kevin in Japan, these people are difficult to treat, expensive, doesn't always work. Sometimes they are so deep into the disease. So what we are encouraged by the clinics that treat these severe patients, they say, Joachim, please see that we don't get more patients coming our way. Most of them don't even take new patients at the moment. So to prevent people from getting sicker is actually our biggest mission, because that is not so difficult to achieve and brings the most benefit.
Excellent, excellent. So just as a final reminder to everyone, follow through. Just again, Joachim, can you show that spike protein test? I think this has to be ordered.
Yeah.
Yes, S1 spike detect. Yes, so this has to be ordered, however, by a doctor in different countries. But
Yes.
there are opportunities for people, and if they wanted to be involved in the oops, not that one. If they wanted to be in the spike survey, this is the link that they can use to Germany as well. So yes, thank you again, Joachim. We'll have lots more work to do, I think, in the near future. So appreciate the work that you're doing, and we want to thank everyone for staying with us for this important discussion. So Joachim, just stay with me as I close out with the outro, and thanks everyone for being with us.
Thank you, everybody.